It was one of those rare Thursday afternoons that managed to feel both endless and fleeting, the kind of day where time seemed to stretch and contract at will. The wind cut through the trees like a secret whisper, swirling autumn leaves around our feet as we pulled into the driveway. Our new home stood before us, both inviting and unsettling, like the opening pages of a novel you know you shouldn't read but can't stop yourself from flipping through. The house was everything we had dreamed of, a historic, weathered piece of New England charm. It was large but not imposing, the white paint on the porch faded by the years, and the roof sloping gently under the weight of decades of history. Ivy crawled up the side of the building like an old friend, wrapping the structure in a dense, green embrace. The kind of place that seemed to belong to another time, another world. I watched Emily as she climbed out of the car, her face flushed with excitement, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled a box from the trunk. She was glowing, her eyes wide, her smile impossibly bright. "It's perfect," she whispered to no one in particular, her voice thick with wonder. I couldn't help but feel a gnawing discomfort in my chest. Don't get me wrong, I was happy enough to finally have a backyard to call my own, space to stretch out, a place to breathe away from the confines of the apartment we'd left behind. But something about the house unsettled me. It wasn't the peeling paint or the creaky floorboards. No, it was something deeper, something that made the air around us feel heavier, almost charged with an energy I couldn't name. It was a sensation I couldn't shake, and though I told myself it was just the usual nerves that come with starting anew, I knew deep down that there was something off about this place. Days passed, and I quickly realized that Emily was having a much easier time settling in than I was. She embraced the house, the old wood floors, the drafty windows, the creaks in the walls. Everything that felt like history to me seemed to spark a sense of belonging in her. But little things started to happen, strange things that I brushed off at first. At night, I would hear the faint sound of footsteps upstairs when I knew no one else was home. The doorbell would ring late in the evening, but when I answered, no one would be there. I could have chalked it up to a trick of the mind, a stretch of imagination, but it happened too frequently to ignore. The first real oddity came one evening after dinner. We had just finished eating, the plates cleared away, and I was relaxing on the couch, flipping through a magazine. Emily was standing in the doorway, watching me. "You've been so quiet lately," she said, her voice tight with concern. There was something unsettling in the way she spoke, like she was trying to gauge my mood, or perhaps searching for something. I hadn't realized it, but I had been unusually quiet. It wasn't intentional. I was just lost in my own thoughts, thinking about work, the move, and the house. But her words struck me, as though I were being tested for something I hadn't even noticed. "I'm fine, Em," I said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Just tired from the move, you know. It's a lot to take in." She didn't seem convinced. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, then she nodded, but the doubt never left her expression. Later that night, while I was shaving before bed, I caught her looking at me strangely. "You shaved it, right?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I glanced at her, confused. "Shaved what?" "Your beard," she said, eyes narrowing. "You had a beard when we moved in. I remember it clearly." I stopped mid-motion, razor in hand, and stared at her. "Emily, I've never had a beard." She blinked, as though processing what I had just said. "But no, really. I've never had one," I repeated. "Not once." For a moment, the air between us grew thick. She stared at me, her lips pressed tight as if something unsaid lingered on the edge of her mind. The tension was palpable, and I felt the familiar itch of unease creep up my spine. The following days grew heavier, the atmosphere in the house more oppressive with each passing hour. Emily seemed to be watching me more closely, her eyes darting toward me when I moved, her posture stiffening as though she were anticipating something. It was small, Subtle things like when I walked into a room, she would flinch slightly, as though she hadn't expected me to be there. Or how she would sometimes pause when I spoke, as if processing my words through a filter of doubt. It wasn't just her behavior that was odd. It was the way she would sometimes stare at me, her gaze distant, almost like she was looking through me. At night, I'd wake to find her sitting up in bed, staring at the wall, her face pale in the moonlight. When I asked her if she was all right, she'd simply nod, but there was an eerie sense of detachment in her eyes. One evening, I overheard a conversation that froze me in place. Emily was on the phone, whispering urgently into the receiver. "He looks like him, but it's not him," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not him. It's someone else." I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest as the blood drained from my face. Who was she talking about? What was she trying to say? Had she somehow already known? The tension in the house began to feel like a living thing, wrapping its cold fingers around us, squeezing tighter with each passing day. Emily's behavior became more erratic. She would forget things, small things, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. One afternoon, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, a photo album open in front of her. The pictures were old, from our honeymoon, our happiest time together. I walked over, my eyes scanning the pages, but then I froze. A photo caught my attention, a picture of the two of us standing at the beach. Emily was laughing, her hair blowing in the wind. But the face next to her wasn't mine. Not exactly. I stared at the image, my heart pounding in my chest. It was me, but the features were wrong. Subtle differences: my jawline was sharper, my eyes colder, more distant. This wasn't the man in the photo. I was looking at a stranger. "Do you remember the strip?" Emily asked, her voice breaking the silence. I turned to her, my mind reeling. I should have said yes. I should have assured her that I remembered every detail of our honeymoon: the sunsets, the laughter, the long walks along the shore. But I didn't. I couldn't. I don't remember," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Her face fell, a flicker of something dark passing behind her eyes. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and looked away. But in that moment, I knew something had shifted between us. Something I couldn't fix, no matter how hard I tried. The days began to blur into one another, each morning feeling like a continuation of the last. But it wasn't the monotony that weighed on me, it was the slow, creeping dread that had started to fester inside me. Emily became increasingly withdrawn. She would sit for hours in silence, her mind clearly elsewhere, her body stiff and rigid, like a puppet with its strings pulled too tight. One night, I woke to the sound of her crying, soft and broken, coming from the bathroom. I hurried to her side, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and confusion. When I opened the door, she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, her face streaked with tears. "What's wrong?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror. "What if he hears me?" she whispered, as though the words were meant to stay hidden, as though saying them aloud would make them real. Who are you talking about?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just stared at me, her face a mask of fear and confusion. I couldn't understand what she meant. Who was she afraid of? And why was she looking at me like that? The moments of tenderness and connection that had once defined our relationship were fading away, replaced by coldness and uncertainty. Emily no longer seemed like the woman I had married. She looked at me as though I were a stranger, a shadow of someone she once knew. The worst came one night, when I was trying to comfort her, trying to make sense of the madness we were living in. She turned to me, her voice trembling, and said, "You're not my husband." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt the air leave my lungs as I stared at her, desperate to make her understand. "Emily, please. I am. I swear to you, I am. But nothing I said could reach her. She was gone mentally, emotionally, I had lost her. The house felt colder, the walls pressing in, suffocating me. It was then that I found the clothes. A bundle of my old shirts, jackets, and trousers, tossed haphazardly in the crawl space. But it wasn't the clothes that made my heart stop. It was the blood. The dark stains on the fabric, the unmistakable red fresh and still darkened with age. I stared at it for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to process what I was seeing. What had happened here? What had I done? What had we done? And then I saw it. A figure standing at the door. A man. My height, my shape, but not me. I followed the figure through the house, numb and trembling, until we reached the mirror in the hallway. There, in the reflection, I saw it. Two versions of me, one moving, one not. The figure that was not me stood perfectly still, staring back at me with cold, empty eyes. The truth settled over me like a shroud. I wasn't the man I thought I was. I had never been him. I was something else, something hollow, something that had taken his place. And Emily had always known. She had always seen the truth before I ever did. But now, it was too late. The man I had been, if I had ever truly been him, was gone. Narrator, in voiceover. We moved into a small, crooked two-bedroom house on the edge of a quiet Pennsylvania town. It was cheap, the kind of place you rent when you need to start fresh but don't have much to your name. The house itself looked like it had seen better days, sagging walls, peeling paint, and a faint musty smell that never quite went away. But it had charm, old charm, the kind you can't buy in a modern home. Mark fell in love with it instantly, almost as though the house was speaking to him. "This is it," he said, his eyes bright with excitement, as though he saw a future in those crooked beams that I couldn't yet picture. At first, I did too. The house felt like a blank slate, a place where we could grow together, where we could start something new. But soon, things started to change. The house began to settle into our lives, and I realized something else was settling in with it, something that wasn't so welcoming. Narrator, it started off small, almost imperceptible, just little things that seemed like a product of the stress of moving. Mark began sleep talking, murmuring in his sleep, soft words that I couldn't make sense of. At first, I shrugged it off. It was just stress, I thought. But then it escalated. He started speaking in full sentences, sentences that chilled me to my core. "She's coming," he whispered one night, his voice trembling, as if he were warning me. "Who?" I asked groggily, but he didn't answer. The next morning, he was as puzzled as I was, claiming to have no memory of what he said. I tried to forget about it, but it gnawed at me. It was just the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand. And then came the night that changed everything. I woke up in the middle of the night to find Mark standing at the foot of the bed, his eyes wide open and staring at the corner of the ceiling. He was still, completely still, as if frozen in place. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I reached out to touch him, my hand trembling, but as soon as I did, he blinked and snapped out of it. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart racing. He shook his head, confused, and claimed he didn't remember any of it. I was dreaming. But that wasn't the look in his eyes. He was lying, or at least, something was. Narrator, the incidents kept happening, each one stranger than the last. At night, when the house was still, I started hearing soft footsteps in the hallway. At first, it was just the sound of someone walking in slippers, the scrape of solace against the old floorboards. I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but as the nights went on, the footsteps grew clearer, closer. It wasn't just the creak of the house settling, these were real steps, slow and deliberate, as though someone were walking through the hall in the dead of night. I asked Mark if he heard it. "What?" he asked, clearly not paying attention. "You don't hear that?" I persisted. He shook his head, his face blank. "No, I don't hear anything." But there was something about his voice, something guarded. It was the same way he'd reacted before, when I asked him about the sleep talking. It wasn't just that he couldn't hear it, it was as if he was pretending not to. I knew he was lying. And that's when I started to fear that whatever was happening here wasn't something I could explain away. I wasn't sure anymore if I was the only one hearing these things. Was he lying to protect me or to protect himself? Narrator: one night, I walked past the hallway mirror, and I saw something that wasn't Mark. It was a blur, a shadow in the reflection, standing near the stairs. I spun around quickly, but when I looked back, there was nothing. My heart was racing, and I stood frozen for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. I asked Mark the next morning if he'd seen anything strange in the hallway. He gave me an odd look. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice sounding too casual, too practiced. "A shadow, or something," I said, trying to sound casual myself, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. He just shrugged. "No, I haven't seen anything. Probably just your imagination." But the way he said it, the way he avoided my eyes, it didn't sit right with me. That's when he started whispering about the woman. "She doesn't like the dark," he told me, his voice low and trembling. "Who doesn't like the dark?" I asked, pressing him. "I don't know," he said quickly, his voice shaking. But I could see the terror in his eyes. I pushed him for more details, but he refused to give them. Then, one day, I found something. A photo in the basement hidden behind old boxes, as if someone had intentionally placed it there. It was a black and white photo of a woman standing in the hallway of our house. She looked eerily familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen her before. She was pale, with dark, hollow eyes. Her expression was cold, almost vacant. I stared at the photo for a long time, my hands shaking. I took it upstairs to show Mark. He saw the photo and smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. "That's her," he said softly. "That's the woman." He said it like it was normal, like it wasn't the most horrifying thing I had ever heard. Narrator: the nights grew worse. Mark's behavior became more erratic, more unsettling. I woke up one evening to find him sitting in the hallway, just staring into space. His hands were folded in his lap, but there was something wrong with the way he held himself, like he wasn't entirely in his body. And there, in his hands, was one of my nightgowns. He was clutching it tightly, whispering to himself. "She wants to feel clothes," he murmured. His voice was almost soothing, like he was trying to comfort himself. But the words made my skin crawl. This wasn't the man I married. It couldn't be. I wanted to scream, to shake him, but something held me back. The man I loved was slipping away, and I had no idea how to bring him back. Narrator: one night, I had enough. I locked the bedroom door, hoping for some peace, hoping for some safety. But the whispering came almost immediately. "Come out, she wants to see you," Mark's voice came from the other side, soft, insistent, like a command. I pressed myself into the corner of the room, my breath coming in short gasps. The sound of his voice, so unlike him, made my stomach twist. I tried to ignore it, but it didn't stop. The whispers continued, growing more desperate, more demanding. "Come out, she wants to see you." The next morning, I found scratch marks on the door, deep gouges, like something had been trying to claw its way in. I stood there, staring at the door, knowing without a doubt that whatever was inside Mark had taken complete control. Narrator: desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian, someone who knew the town's dark secrets. What I learned shook me to my core. The house had a history, a bloody history. The man who had lived here before us, Thomas Weller, had died exactly 30 years ago, found dead in the hallway with a pair of slippers by his side. Mark's slippers. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Mark hadn't just moved into the house. The house had moved into him. The same way Thomas Weller had been claimed by the house, so too was Mark. Maybe Thomas had never truly left. Maybe he was still here, in the walls, in the air. And maybe he had never been alone. Narrator, I couldn't stay there anymore. One night, in the dead of winter, I packed my things, as quietly as I could, and left. I didn't know where I was going, I just had to leave. I fled the house, never looking back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark had never followed. The house, our home, was empty, but somehow, I couldn't escape the feeling that Mark was still there. I wanted to believe he was gone, but something told me he wasn't. And I couldn't help but wonder, is he still there? Or is she? The house was empty, but it still haunted me. It still haunts me.